The Cincinnati Reds and Philadelphia Phillies have finished up their 7 games that they were going to play all season long. Yeah, it's April, and the Reds and the Phillies don't play each other anymore the rest of this year. But we know that the Phillies won 4 and the Reds won 3, which honestly, and I'm going to tip my hand a little bit, I was kind of happy about how the Reds performed in this series. We're going to get into exactly why. Plus, I know that the Phillies moving forward are going to be about a lot better than what we have seen in these 7 games and kind of to this point in the season, although Connor just shrugged. By the way, I'm Jeff Carr. I'm a co-host for Locked On Reds. Next to me is Stephen Offenbaker. He is the other co-host for Locked On Reds. And Connor Thomas from Locked On Phillies joins us here today. So let's start with that, Connor. What was your overall feeling for this series?
I still, listen, I don't know. And it sucks being, it doesn't suck. I enjoy doing this, but being someone who's supposed to be in the know about this Phillies team is tough right now because I still can't make heads or tails of what they are. Right. They'll come out and they'll put up what they did today and scored 9 in the first inning and end up winning a game 14 runs, 15 runs they put up against the Marlins the series before. And then they'll come out and they'll look like they have no business playing Major League Baseball. So that's why I shrugged when you were like, I expect the Phillies to play better baseball. I do. I agree with you. But to this point, they're still very much a coin flip every time they go out. And consistency is something that this team is really lacking that maybe they'll pick up from today's performance.
That was my takeaway. Yeah, that was my takeaway too from the Phillies. I think the lineup has this ceiling, this potential, and they're just not consistently reaching it. The pitching may be a bit more of a question. I'm not sure. Yes. We want to talk to you about that a little bit. But from an offensive standpoint, from the position players, it just feels to me like they haven't quite found their groove. But I'm glad we're done playing you because I think you guys could score a lot of runs when things heat up and the balls start flying around Major League Baseball.
Yeah, listen, you saw it today. You saw it with the Marlins series before we came to Cincinnati and putting 9 earned on Sandy Alcantara. This team has a really, really high ceiling when they get healthy and get everybody back. And you're right, Steve. Pitching is probably the bigger question mark than the lineup because you know these guys are going to hit. And when the weather clears and it's a nice day like it is today, ball's going to fly better. That'll all help. But some of the starts you're getting from guys like Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola. And Nola, fine today, but the starts so far this year have not been typical of the top end of rotation guys. And the back end, because of injuries, we haven't seen Ranger Suarez yet. Andrew Painter never made a debut. He will later. You're throwing relievers in the back end of the rotation, and that's not something that's sustainable. So those top guys are really going to have to start consistently going into the 6th or 7th inning if you're going to win baseball games regularly.
And I think that's why the Reds did so well in this series is because right now it feels like the Reds lineup seems to be on a certain kind of roll. Now, not everybody is hitting very well. There's still a couple of guys that we want to get, figure out if they can get going. But Will Myers broke out on Saturday's game and you've had a lot of great performances from the top 4 hitters in this lineup. So I think they were just able to take advantage of a hurt pitching staff for the Phillies, but also more so than that, I was confused on Saturday because Matt Strom, so is he like an opener at this point just because they're kind of like, we don't really have any other plan or?
No, he was the first pitcher to throw into the 6th inning for the Phillies in a start this year. He's actually been really good as a starter. He hadn't allowed a run until he saw you guys that time in his start so far. So, no, he's not supposed to be an opener. Going out after 2 2/3 innings pitched will kind of make it seem like that. But, no, he's in the starting rotation as a starter. He just didn't. It was one of those games where you have a guy who, in Strom, is not good enough to start at this level. He's brought in to be a bullpen piece, and he's forced into that role. Hadn't really been a starter since 2019 with San Diego. And that's why he's in the rotation now. But you had 2 really good starts from him. And then you have the little backtrack. Oh, right, this is why this guy is in the bullpen and not a starter with that one. So not an opener, just an opening performance that wasn't very good.
Not good enough to start at the major league level makes me cringe, Steve.
Yeah.
There's
we've got a lot of that going on.
Yeah. Too much. We talk a lot about this in depth. We have an extra episode that's coming out today as well. But when we look at kind of how this series performed, I honestly thought that the Reds did a little bit better. I thought it was going to be 2-5 rather than 3-4. But I think getting out of this series, going 3-4, for me, Steve, at least feels all right. What were your expectations relative to how they performed?
I just didn't want to get swept. in either of the series. And I mean, I really feel like, as I mentioned, that Philadelphia lineup is pretty dangerous all the way around. So I just didn't want to get swept. And then when we got into the games I feel like, we played 7 times and we won 3 of them. That one that got away in Philadelphia is going to bother me a little bit because, we should have been able to flip that number a little bit. We should have won 4 games in this series. And that just adds to the excitement I've been talking about, Jeff, and that we'll talk about in our bonus episode. The excitement I have about watching our young lineup and our position players. As bad as the pitching has been at times, Connor, this lineup is just so much fun to watch. Guys like Jonathan India, Spencer Steer, and Tyler Stevenson. It's just fun, even when the pitchers are out there looking like the Bugs Bunny GIF of just boom, boom, boom. The lineup is fun to watch.
Yeah, listen, my biggest impression from playing you guys as many times as we have already and seeing you guys for potentially the last time. We'll see what happens come end of the season and if anything crazy happens there. Well, hey, listen, from where the Phillies are at right now, anything's possible. So if I think we have a chance, I got it. In fairness, I think you guys have a look at some point. But I was impressed with the lineup and the offensive capabilities that you have with the Cincinnati Reds. Like when this team gets more settled in, and some of the guys who are hitting well right now, but they get more settled in at the major league level and can consistently put together approaches like you saw in some of these games of the series, got some players there. And this is it's a fun team to watch. I'd rather not see Will Myers for the rest of forever after Saturday, but you guys can hit the ball, and with the way Great American Ballpark plays, you got to look to make a little bit of noise. It should be a more fun season than last season, and it was a really competitive series against a strong Phillies team.
It would be hard for it to be a less fun season than last year. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know what would have to go wrong, but a lot would have to go wrong. Last season was just god awful.
No, I don't want to know what would make that worse, but I'll tell you this. There was a guy in the Phillies lineup, and I know we're talking about the lineup kind of coming along and things like that. There was a guy in the Phillies lineup who impressed me. We're going to talk about that coming up here in just a moment. Before we jump into that, though, wanted to let you know about one of our sponsors here for today's episode, and that is the Ultimate GM app. And you got to check it out today. You can go to probaseballgm.com, or if you're watching here on YouTube, you can click the nice little QR code that's in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. We've been playing this game. It's been so addicting. Connor, my team is the Fairfield Hoagies. What's your team's name?
It's funny because it's the Philly Reds. So that's one of the stock teams in there. So we got a little crossover in the crossover.
You got a crossover in the crossover. Oh my goodness. Yeah. This has just gone Christopher Nolan on us. But you can go Christopher Nolan on the general manager game by checking out the Ultimate GM app. If you ever thought you could build a better team than the Phillies or the Reds, you might have a easier time building a better team than the Reds or the Phillies. But you should check out the Ultimate GM app. And Locked On Reds and Locked On Phillies listeners can get a 100% free boost today on your franchise. Just go to the game store and type in the promo code Locked On, and make sure you check this game out. It puts you in the driver's seat of taking a team from the bottom to the top. That's the Ultimate GM app. Get it today at probaseballgm.com. Click this here QR code in the bottom right, or go to the App Store or the Google Play Store. That's probaseballgm.com. Ultimate Baseball GM. Start your dynasty today. And what we're talking about today is wrapping up this series with the Reds and the Phillies, the regular season series, that is. Who knows? Maybe there's a postseason series.
Never say never.
Never say never. That's right.
Never say never. Exactly. There's a non-zero chance of that happening. I don't want to know what the actual number is, but yeah. But thank you so much for joining us here. Again, this is Locked On Reds and Locked On Phillies. Make sure you follow us in between episodes. You can follow me at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs. You can follow Steve at S. Offenbaker with 2 Fs. And for Phillies takes, you can get Connor's thoughts at Connor Thomas 975. He is down at the stadiums for home games and stuff like that. Have you ever gotten to any away games and gotten credential there?
I haven't. No, it's so hard to travel with the day-to-day morning sports talk and having to be in to actually get on the road for trips. Eventually, I do want to make one of those trips out and see ballparks, but now not as often on the roads. But I watch all the games, of course. even the ones that end up with Josh Harrison pitching.
Well, one of these days, maybe we'll get behind the scenes. Yeah, I got to see Josh Harrison pitch in person. I was at the Saturday game. That was insane. And I know that we're going to get to some interesting performances, but there was somebody on the Phillies that just impressed me in every game that I watched of this series, and that was Bryson Stott. Bryson Stott really looks like he's figuring it out. It looks like that he just knows the leadoff spot. This is like old hat for him, and I know it's not old hat for him. I know that this is not like his typical, like, he's not been here very long, but what he has shown to start this season makes me believe that he's the kind of guy who can be a catalyst for a lineup full of former and future all-stars, and I know that's got to have you pumped.
Oh, totally. And the funny thing is I looked up and down this lineup to start, and you go down it and you say, okay, you got all these all-stars, and then you have some young players who you've seen a lot from a couple years. Like, I think Alec Bohm. Alec Bohm was an NL Rookie of the Year candidate, and he's played multiple years at the major league level. And I keep looking, and the one guy I kept coming back to in the offseason was Bryson Stott. He had some offensive struggles near the end of last year. He's heading into his second year. Is that sophomore slump a real thing? And I said, he's a huge question mark in this lineup, maybe the biggest one as to whether or not he'll be able to contribute. And then he goes ahead and he starts off getting hits in every single one of the Phillies games so far, sitting over 400. He's had an incredible start. I don't know if the credit goes fully to him because Kevin Long, the hitting coach here in Philadelphia, has had a lot of glowing reviews from players and from places he's been in the past. And it seems like he's working on a lot of these guys' swings. So I think that has a lot to do with it. But man, what that kid is doing at the plate right now is absolutely unbelievable. I wonder where the streak ends. Can he make it to 20 games? Can he make it to 30? Can he start to get into that Jimmy Rollins territory for the longest one in Philadelphia Phillies history? There's nothing he's not capable of right now. And the at-bats he's putting together are just, it's a joy to watch.
Yeah, and I know kind of mentioned like hitting coaches and the way that they're working with the lineup. I know, Steve, we've talked about this a little bit. It just seems like all through this series, all through the series in Philadelphia, the Reds' mantra of just taking pitches and working through every single pitch has continued to play through.
Well, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, Jeff, and I think, we should continue to talk about it as long as it remains true. We never hesitate to bag on a hitting coach when a team is not performing.
Easy, yeah.
And we never talk about the guy when the team is performing. And just the change in philosophy that the Reds have demonstrated this year over last year and years prior of taking pitches, it's clearly being instilled from the coaching staff because every single hitter is doing it the same way. They're working counts. They're being patient, and the results speak for themselves. It's truly, like I said earlier, it's fun to watch. And I would be interested to hear from Connor because we talk all the time about this, Jeff, and we try not to be homers or bias, but we're emotionally invested in this team, you and I. I'd be interested to hear from Connor. Who do you think is the most dangerous Reds hitter?
It depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about the opportunity to leave the ballpark as opposed to average, I still see Jonathan India and the approach he has at the plate at the top of that lineup most days. That I say, okay, that's the guy that if you're not going to let someone go like 4 for 5, he's kind of the guy that seems to be the fire starter for this team, that if he can get things going, he's definitely a catalyst for that. I really liked what I saw from Tyler Stephenson in both series. I think he's got an opportunity to be a really nice hitter at the major league level. And his approach also looked good as well. So, I mean, honestly, those top 3 where you're looking at Steer and Stevenson and India, who I just mentioned, that's where, and of course we saw the Will Myers power on display, but one game having a nice day. I mean, I'm not trying to discount Will Myers' ability. I'm just saying 2 home runs in a game doesn't do the same for me as the approach I saw from those top guys in the lineup. And that's what really stood out about why the Reds could be difficult to play against. If you can get a team started fast, like the Reds can with those top 3, get out to an early lead and kind of put a team behind the 8 ball or jump a starting pitcher early, that can make teams that may be better on paper very uncomfortable playing against the Cincinnati Reds.
Yeah, I wonder because this is something that I know that Steve has been the most optimistic about, but I kind of wonder about Tyler Stephenson's power. Like we've talked about him before.
It'll come. Stop it.
And Steve has said 30 to 40 home runs. I don't know if that's what we're talking about here. Now he could go on a hot streak and then change my mind completely, but he reminds me of just a timely hitter, a guy more like a Sean Casey or something like that. He's going to drop in, he's going to hit that RBI when you need that RBI, but it might not necessarily be with the big fly like all the chicks dig.
Yeah, right. So sort of like, Nick Castellanos. Now I know his last year before he left, he had the big year where he hit a bunch of home runs, was an all-star, but he over his career was more naturally a doubles hitter, a guy that's going to find gaps and is going to come through in big spots. Now I'm more in Steve's camp. I think Stephenson does exhibit a swing path that creates a little bit of pop. And I don't know about 30 to 40. Obviously, I'm not as ingrained in following the Reds as you guys are, not even close. But what I saw in the series with how he attacks the baseball, I could see those type of mechanics from him where he's got a swing that's going to create balls leaving the ballpark at some point.
No, I definitely appreciate that point of view because, I mean, that was something I was looking at with some different players. And I remember the series that Philadelphia played in Cincinnati in 2022. And Garrett Stubbs really sort of showed out in that. And I know he didn't do a whole lot in this series. He kind of played in Saturday's game and was didn't really do any damage or anything like that. But Stott was the guy that kind of stood out for me. Steve, who was the guy that when you watch this series, when you think about this series, the Phillies guy that's going to be on the forefront of your mind?
Every time I would tell you, every time I watch the Philadelphia Phillies, the guy that I watch the most, the player that I lock in on is JT Realmuto. I love that dude. I love what he does behind the plate and working with the pitchers. I love what he does offensively in the batter's box. He's probably the one I have the most fun watching. And then just because of the connection to Cincinnati, I always kind of pay attention to whatever Castellanos is doing as well. But for a non-Red connected player, for me, it's always JT Realmuto.
Yeah, he's had a bit of a rough start to the year. Him and Kyle Schwarber both have been pretty bad with runners in scoring position. I know they put it together a little bit in this series, but those are the guys. There's so many times for the Phillies early on in this season where it'll be like Stott batting leadoff and Turner batting second, and you'll have like back-to-back singles to start, and then the next guys will go down 1, 2, 3 without scraping a run across. And that's been largely on Realmuto, who you were just talking about, and Schwarber. But just the way you talk about him, Steve, you can tell the weight that player carries around baseball. JT Realmuto is going to hit when everything's all said and done. And Kyle Schwarber led the National League in homers last year. So I don't have long-term concerns about them. How talented of players they are. They're just two guys that if this team's going to do what they did today and not what they did on Saturday, they're going to have to more consistently come through in big spots.
I'm not really sure there's all that much of a debate, but best catcher in baseball, I think he'll come around.
Yeah.
He's got my vote.
And hey, once upon a time, the Marlins had to choose. Well, okay, the Marlins didn't choose because apparently the Reds chose for them, but there was a possibility that Nick Senzel would have been in a trade offer for JT Realmuto, and the Reds.
Can we still do that?
What?
Can we still do that?
Yeah. Can we go?
No, thank you.
Offers on the table. But, I'll tell you what. I do want to ask you about some trades here coming up because moving forward, I mean, both of our teams are under 500, and one of us has World Series aspirations. The other wishes we did, but maybe not necessarily quite this year in Cincinnati. But what needs to change? That's what we're going to focus on coming up here in just a moment. Before we get to that, though, I wanted to tell you about one of our other sponsors today, and that is So Rare. Our new sponsor, So Rare, is a revolutionary fantasy baseball game and marketplace that transforms fans into owners with officially licensed digital cards featuring players from across all 30 MLB teams. I had a team this weekend that included a couple of Reds. I might have been a little bit of a homer, but I had TJ Friedl in there. He didn't quite pop off as much as I thought he was going to, but still, you can get a nice value on a couple of different Reds players that are still on the come up and not necessarily widely known. Because what you do is you go to SoRare.com, you create your free account, SoRare.com/lockedon, and you create your team because you can draft them using like a budget of points where it's you pick whoever you want. It's not necessarily you are limited to certain players and you get, somebody else picks the other player for you. This is something where you budget your team accordingly. So I've got Hunter Green on there. I did pick Aaron Nola, although I didn't start him because I was like, no, I want him. I'm not going to start him against my team. That's not something I want to do, But the whole key is to win the contests. And as you start out with your free contest, you can win some prizes like rare cards from So Rare. And as you level up in your different contests with your extra rare cards, you can win even more prizes like jerseys. You can get tickets. You can even get VIP experiences where you get to meet MLB stars. So Rare puts you in control of your fantasy experience. So head to sorare.com/lockedon. That's SORARE.com/lockedon and draft your team of free player cards today. Set your lineup and start competing. That's sorare.com/lockedon to start playing today. All right, as we move forward, the Reds got a home series against the Tampa Bay Rays. You might have heard of them. They're pretty stacked. They've had a nice start to the season, so that's going to be a test for them. And then the Phillies, are they heading out on the road still?
Heading to Chicago to play the White Sox, yes.
Hey, it's supposed to snow in Chicago this week, so you know.
Hopefully not on the south side. Maybe it'll stay north and just at Wrigley.
Stay over at Wrigley. Yeah. You know, Jeff, before we get into the trade talk, there was a question that I had for Connor. I would love to get his thoughts on this. There was a lot of gnashing of teeth and wringing of hands when Nick Castellanos was allowed to get away from Cincinnati, and the fact that the front office never even really called him with an offer. And, you know, ultimately he ends up in Philadelphia. Knowing what you know now, seeing what you've seen so far, how do you evaluate that signing of Nick Castellanos in Philadelphia? The value of his contract versus what he's brought to the team. Break that down for me a little bit.
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting scenario. So I view this a different way that I think most fans do when you see the signing and the amount of money that he signs, where you're looking at a $100 million contract plus. So that's an amount of money that fans see and say, okay, we're signing a superstar. And he was coming off a great year. And then last year, he didn't have an exceptional year for the Philadelphia Phillies. He had some time to settle in. And he's always, when he goes new places, if you look over the course of his career, has a little bit of a down year the first year as he gets settled, and then he really opens it up as he gets more comfortable with the team. So I think you've really been able to see him do that this year. And I look at team success. Last year, sure. Can you say Nick Castellanos was underwhelming? Yeah. Did the Philadelphia Phillies go to the World Series? Also, yes. So when you have a piece that's playing every day and you can go to the World Series with that guy, I'd say they're good enough. And this year you've seen him bounce back. But there's a guy, we're going to do a little sports crossover real quick. Tobias Harris, who plays for the Sixers, he has one of those super max, biggest deals you can get in the NBA. And he's like the fourth option. And everyone looks at the contract and says, you're paying this guy all this money. He's got to produce like that. That's not the case. And Castellanos is similar. People are going to see the dollar amount and say, you got to hit 35 home runs and a billion doubles and be this great guy in the middle of the lineup for us to value that at that contract. But he's not going to be the guy he was the last year in Cincinnati, where he's an all-star. That's not typical of him. But he's going to be a contributor in the middle of the lineup. He's going to hit doubles. He's going to find gaps like we were talking about with Tyler Stephenson, and kind of that guy that just is more timely hitting. And once the fans accept that as the expectation of Nick Castellanos and not look at the dollar amount, he's going to be a really nice piece to have here in Philadelphia. You can already see it early this year.
He's going to be the one for me for a while of what might have been. I would love to have, the Reds were never going to give him that kind of money. And at the end of the day, he has to maximize his value while he can make the dollars. I get it. But if he was still here and he was on this team last year and this year and maybe a couple more years as all of this young talent, could you imagine him in the middle of this lineup with guys like Ellie De La Cruz and Tyler Stevenson and Jonathan India and Spencer Steer? Can you imagine? He's going to be the one that got away in my mind for a while with the way that he could have continued to perform at Great American Ballpark with all of this young talent.
There's definitely an alternate universe where a billionaire buys the Reds after the 2021 season and signs him to a long-term contract, as well as, a couple other guys. And then the lineup is set for multiple years to come because, he still has a couple of years left. And I think a lot of people get hung up on these contracts and just say, well, at the end of the contract, what's he going to be like? What's he going to do in the first 3 years? And the other part of that is, what was the alternative? Was he blocking anybody? Was there a bunch of other people on the market that were cheaper than him? No, You paid to get the best right fielder on the market, and that's what you did in that moment. And you can't wait. Like the Reds or the Phillies could not have waited on somebody else to come along, and that's probably where we kind of turn the discussion, because I think both teams moving forward have similar goals in that they need to fix a part of their pitching staff. The Phillies probably more so on the rotation, the Reds a little bit of the rotation, mostly the bullpen. But when you look at what the Phillies need to do, does that include, and is it a realistic expectation to see them trading for a starter?
I'd be very surprised if they traded for a starter, because you look at where their rotation is now. Your top three guys who are available, and they're not technically in that order right now because of weird stuff first couple weeks, but Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, Taijuan Walker, those guys are all above average major league starters. Two of them well above average when they're at their best. And then you have Ranger Suarez, who's going to come back, who is also an above average major league starter. Once he's healthy, you're good. And Andrew Painter is still that guy waiting in the wings. That he's got a UCL sprain right now, and he's rehabbing from that. The point that I'm kind of looking at for him is right around in June, which I know it's a ways off, and you've got to take care of business now. But he was the top pitching prospect in baseball coming into this season. So it'd be weird to make a trade and give up assets when you have two guys that you believe could be plus major league pitchers to round out their rotation at some point. They're just not here right now. So I wouldn't see a trade for a starter coming for the Phillies anytime soon.
Meanwhile, when it comes to the bullpen, Steve, I know that the Reds aren't going to go out and make a trade for the bullpen, but maybe part of the plan that they had back in the offseason when they didn't sign anybody and they were like, no, everybody's going to come back from injury. Maybe that starts to help.
Yeah, and we're going to go into this in a lot more detail on our bonus episode that's going to come out a little bit later today, Jeff. But for me, we know that there's a little bit of help on the way for the Reds bullpen this week. Maybe as early as today, Lucas Sims has pitched 4 consecutive scoreless outings on his rehab assignment down in Louisville. That's a big help on the back end of this bullpen, because Alexis Diaz cannot pitch every single day for 2 innings or 3 innings. You know, he's going to be done by June if they don't bring him some help. That helps. My thought process with this Reds bullpen thus far is that the Reds organization has asked pitchers to do things they're not suited to do. We're asking middle innings guys to be back end of the bullpen kind of guys and pitch in those high leverage situations where they don't excel. That has to stop. We're asking relief pitchers to pitch in the rotation, someplace they really should not be. And that is showing, and that needs to stop. So the Reds lineup finds me getting a little bit excited about their ability to be maybe not a division winner, maybe not even a wild card winner, but a disruptor, a team that can at least keep the rest of the National League Central honest and make them work for it, right? This lineup has the potential to do that right now. We keep talking about 2024, but they could do that right now. The Reds need to fix the pitching, and going back to the old hashtags, get the pitching, fix the pitching. God. But if they just did that, this team could be not only continue to be fun to watch, like I've been saying, but they could disrupt things, and they could make other teams have to trade away assets and respond. They could make other teams have to do things they wouldn't necessarily do if they can just coast to victory. And I think that's where the Reds are right now. And I hope the Reds front office embraces this philosophy of, not going all in to try and go out and get pitching and trade for people, but let's just put guys back into the best situations to be successful and disrupt things a little bit. Let's go out there and be a pain in everybody's ass.
Yeah, that's going to be the key here. And really the entire goal for 2023 for this Reds team was, let's figure out what we have for the future. And I think we're starting to figure out a number of key positions. So how can they go out this next offseason and support those guys? Because next offseason, they have no guaranteed money on the books right now. They're going to have lots of room to work with. Hopefully there's no other shenanigans that we can't predict just yet of, certain people making excuses. We won't go into any names. SOB. But when it comes, son of Bob, but when it comes to where the Reds are in relation to where they want to end this season, we want to see progress with a couple of key players. And honestly, that's really kind of where that ends. And disruption is going to be key and fun, but it's not necessarily going to be a goal for the Reds to win this division, which probably has some feathers ruffled, but you got to set the expectation, right? This is where this Reds team is. They're going to get there. It's probably not going to be this year. And on that disappointment, it's time to end. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here on this crossover edition as we wrap up the Reds and Phillies series for this 2023 regular season. Moving forward, we're going to have our eye on the Phillies all the time. I mean, most Reds fans still love Nick Castellanos unconventionally. I did randomly hear a couple of people chanting traitor whenever he walked up to the plate the other day, and I'm like, do you guys, know how that went? Do you know that? Never mind. That's really where we're going to keep our eye on. Connor, thanks for joining us. And
thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.